What's up? This is Diva, delivered, inspired, victorious, anointed, and it's all about the hoodlums tonight. Due to some scheduling problems, I'm here alone, but I'm not here alone because I have the prolific preacher, that awesome prognosticator, this woman of God, the Reverend Dr. Dominique A. Robinson. And I'm going to let her just briefly introduce herself to you as she feels comfortable.
What up, family? It's such an honor to be here with you all. Thank you so much, Pastor Parker, for this opportunity. My name is Dominique Aisha Robinson. That's A, not I. And I currently serve, and humbled and honored, I currently serve as the John E. Hines Assistant Professor of Preaching at the Seminary of the Southwest in Austin, Texas. And for those who are tuning in and joining us, which you might remember about where I used to serve, I am now the Dean Emerita from Wiley College, and the home of the great debaters in Marshall, Texas. And so I am a preaching professor. I am an advocate for youth and young adults, for women in the academy and in ministry. And I'm a girl from Newark trying to tell y'all about a man from Nazareth so that we can make it to heaven.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I think that pretty much covers it. Now, I have been, a lot of people might not know you. I think you do. I think you're pretty well known because that sermon, I got 99 problems, but my faith ain't one. Okay. That was it right there. So tell me about your journey from growing up, going to Pentecostal church with one grandmother and then Baptist church with another grandmother. And then here you are now on the cutting edge of womanist theology.
Whew. So I am a product of my environment, in so many ways. My father's mother was the founding pastor of the Pentecostal church that I grew up in. And I mean, good, down, urban and country Pentecostalism, where, we wore no makeup, no pants, head coverings. We fasted all the time. Ooh, I don't, I, yeah, I think I fasted enough for my entire life at this point. I put a down payment on my future. No, I'm kidding. And so she was the founding pastor of the church I grew up in, and it started off as a family church and it just grew from there. But I come from a large family. Both of my grandmothers had 10 children, so both of my parents are one of 10.
Oh, wow.
And my grandmother, who founded the church, overseer Della V. Smith, was one of 34. So that was a large family. So we were a large family church, but then plenty of people in the community joined the church. My grandmother did a lot of street evangelism. I mean, she was the person that would stop on the corners and talk to the brothers who were outside the corner, outside the liquor stores, didn't look the part, dress the part. And so our ministry was very focused on just real street ministry. I was the kid that was getting picked up from school in the church van.
Mm-hmm.
Woo, with my friends yelling down the hallway, Dominique, your grandmama outside. So, that was my upbringing with my father's mother, where I feel like we were in church every day. We were not, but I feel like we were in church every day. We had evening Sunday worship services, so start at 5 o'clock. We had shut-ins Friday nights. There were choir rehearsals and, plenty of revivals. She definitely walked in the fivefold ministry, just heavily anointed. And growing up, I didn't have this language. I didn't know what that was. I just knew my grandmother, at that time, I felt like she got up and had breakfast with Jesus. They had Cheerios in the morning and then she was able to just function. My mother's mother was very proper, pristine, conservative, from Augusta, Georgia. I didn't get that. Siri is all in our Kool-Aid. From Augusta, Georgia, Silk Stocking Baptist Church. She per se wasn't the person who really believed in women in ministry, but certainly believed that women had a calling. So I spent most of my weekends with my father's mother, most of my week with my mother's mother. And my mother's mother, we had church early Sunday mornings. And so I would go to church with her early Sunday mornings, have dinner, probably take a nap. And then I was in Pentecostal worship service Sunday nights and going to school Monday after 2 full worship services, hiding basketball shorts under my denim skirts and trying to figure out life. But I grew up with these two women who took God very seriously. Had very deep prayer lives. My mother's mother always listened to Mahalia Jackson, always had some preacher on the radio, had this large Bible open on the dining room table or the coffee table. Meanwhile, my father's mother, I would wake up in the middle of the night and hear her praying and speaking in tongue. And I would wake up with oil dripping off my forehead because she done anointed us while we were sleeping. I would, she would have these visions and prophecies and speak to us and tell us what she saw, and we would govern ourselves accordingly. She would call the family to these fasts. And so I just feel like between the two of them and their prayer life, I'm a product of their prayer life. I'm a product of what they sought God for. I think that if they were living, I think that they would be pretty shocked about my journey and where I am, because I was not the grandchild that was so obedient. I was not the grandchild happy to be in church or happy to put on pantyhose. I was not. So I think that they both would be a little maybe shocked on the surface, but probably quite content spiritually because they know what they prayed for. So that was my upbringing. I answered the call to ministry at the age of 13. I had been grown and fast. I was out there at a party that I shouldn't have been at. The police came, we ran to the woods. I got bit by a spider. I don't remember the bite. I remember the injury. And I wind up in the hospital with doctors feeling like they needed to drain my knee and try to get the infection before it got to the bone. The entire time I'm thinking about, can I return back to basketball? But I remember being in the hospital bed and praying and asking God, if you can get me out of this, I promise you, I'll do whatever you ask me to do. And I got out of that bed on crutches though. I had an IV in my arm for about a month thereafter, still to continue to kind of clean my system and things. I was on crutches for a month. I did not return to basketball right away, but I sure did preach my first sermon in the pulpit with some crutches in 1998 at the age of 13. And I answered my call to ministry and started preaching then. But I grew up in this Pentecostal church where I felt like everybody was anointed. Everybody had some sort of manifestation of the Holy Ghost. They were speaking in tongues and moving. And so I literally, Pastor Parker, am the product of what people have read in the shack of God being this big Black woman in the kitchen cooking.
Yes.
That was God for me growing up. Yes. Shack was not nothing new. Shack was my life.
See, I was going to ask you about that because I read somewhere that you said you thought that God was a Black woman.
I did.
And I think that we as Black women are uniquely created with the nurture, the strength, and the love that would certainly make it possible for people to believe that, yes, the Black woman is God. So thank you for sharing all of that. Listen, like I said, I'm humbled and honored that you're here. So I want to talk a little bit about, as a woman in ministry and in the circles that you move in, I know that you have dealt with some, shall we say, roadblocks. How have you been able to overcome some of the, things that are said about women in ministry, are thought about women in ministry, and some of the things that try to hold back women in ministry?
I am still encountering roadblocks. And if I'm honest, most of my roadblocks are other women, though the system is patriarchy and classism and capitalism and elitism and sexism. It most times manifests in someone who looks just like me, which is extremely disappointing and hurtful. I think that because I answered the call so young and started navigating ministry circles so young, it doesn't hurt as much as it used to. As a matter of fact, it may have even built I challenge you, I wish you would, I dare you to in me. And if I'm going to be 100, which I know this is what we do on this line here, my first kind of masculine presence challenge happened when I joined the AME Zion Church.
Oh, yeah?
I had a pastor. Yeah, I guess I won't drop his name. And see, let me say, and while I say that, we as women oftentimes will not drop somebody's name to protect them, but they don't give a care about us, and they will drop our name and say whatever, demonize us, make rumors, like come up with all types of stuff. So I mean, I don't care about dropping his name. I don't want to mess up nobody's perspective on the line. But I had a pastor who left an institution. See, I'm gonna give y'all enough clues to figure out if you want to. Left one of the Amy Zion educational institutions and moved up north to pastor a church. And when he arrived, I was already serving there. He came after a female pastor who was doing amazing there. And it was her leadership that led me to join the Amy Zion Church. I felt like the Amy Zion Church was a good balance between the Baptist tradition and the Pentecostal tradition I came from. And when I met her in her serving, she was speaking in tongues, praying. I was like, oh, I could do this. I could do this here. What drew me to the Amy Zion Church was the structure, was the fact that if there was something going on at the local church, there was a presiding elder. In other churches, there's this board of bishops. So that's one of the things that truly attracted me to the church, because I like systems. I like to know that we are not caught up in one person's personality or one person's ability to do something. Now, of course, I know every system has its flaws, and that's not what this call is or this conversation is about. But my very first encounter with a male speaking out loud about me being a female is what I want to say is what I continue to run into. He literally said to me, you're a little too confident to be a female in ministry as young as you are. And I know that was really rooted in the fact that I grew up with women speaking and praying and preaching. I didn't even know it was an issue. I didn't know that my confidence would become a problem. And I realized it wasn't just my confidence. It was my ovaries. It was my style. I even had a bishop in our church say, you are one brash young preacher. I'm only brash because I'm a woman speaking like this. But if a man was speaking like this, I wouldn't be called a young brash young preacher. And so I think that some of the roadblocks come up, like I said, often because of who we are. As Black women, we have always had to be resilient and strong and creative. And it's so funny that the very things that people are attracted to in us are the same things that they become insecure about around us. So you want me to be confident as a mother in your house. You want me to be confident as a spouse to you. You want me to be able to make decisions to help run this household. But the minute it comes to doing things in ministry and in church and running this house of God, is problematic. I will say that, I am from Newark, New Jersey, so I'm very northern. I've spent quite a bit of time in the South, so I have some Southern sensibilities as well. So I know that some of it is cultural, as far as like your swag and your tone and your confidence and how you address people and do things. But I just think it's very interesting how women demonize other women based off of our shape, how we wear our hair. They try to deduce our value to whether we can produce children or whether we're married or whether the marriage worked. Oftentimes trying to equate whether a marriage should work if we have the ability to cook or please our husband, as if there aren't other things that should be considered, or as if just being a woman is enough, whether I've produced a child or not. And so I think it's those types of traditions, morals, and ethics that are roadblocks to us as women in ministry that other women put on us. And then that gives permission to men to keep thinking they can do and say what they want. And when we are in spaces where people can get away with saying things that they just really shouldn't say, we're done preaching, we're at the back of the church, and somebody's like, I know you're not still single. I got a nephew coming out of jail. Who told you I was single? We are in a culture where I can't speak about being with somebody because if I do, I'm a Jezebel. I'm sleeping around. But if he comes into this church, pastor for 5 years, and brings in a different woman every year, you have nothing to say about that. Nothing to say about that. He can get up and say, I thank God for my special friend being here, and y'all gonna move on and swoon. But the minute we as women get up and decide we're gonna acknowledge a spouse, which is why I appreciate how much Bishop Vashti McKenzie would get up and acknowledge her spouse and her husband. And in this moment, while we're saying this, we honor his presence and what he has done, contributed to the church and to society at large. And so I remember how people would pause for a moment and almost get annoyed because of the way she would celebrate her spouse. But if a man did that, they didn't have nothing to say about it. And so I pray that the Lord sends me whomever so that I can get up and swoon just as much as Bishop Vashti when I get up and be like, and I thank God for my fine chocolate, caramel, bearded, employed, working Black man who makes sure that when I take these heels off, I'm still tall enough to be, I just want to be able to say that when I get up to preach and say, and now here's the word of God. Now, the truth is, sis, is that if I do that, there will be plenty who cannot even hear the word because they are so stuck on the fact that I'm in that.
That's true. That is so true. And the thing that I have in recent years started paying more attention to, because I see women, I call them broken dolls. And if I do a PhD, I'm going to do it on the broken doll syndrome, because that's a woman who has gone through something as a child. She's very broken, but she makes herself look really, really good on the outside, and nobody can tell, but she's real mean and blah, 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 blah. But I said all that to say this. In leadership positions in most churches, especially the pastor, you see a man. But who do you see sitting in the pews? Women. And the reason why a lot of these women are coming to the altar over and over, laid out, crying and hollering, is because the issue that they are dealing with is not being addressed. Because men refuse to acknowledge that being a Black woman, being a woman, being in America, we face a lot of situations that could mean our life on a daily basis, just like Black men do. But everybody wants to talk about what the men are going through. I'm not trying to discount the men, but have you found that when in a leadership position as a woman, have you found women to be open to hearing a different perspective that is more helpful to them, or have they just been more married to the status quo?
My experience is that they have been married to the status quo, and I might be, getting on somebody's nerves when I say this. There, I feel like the women have a problem with other women in leadership is because they have this twisted theological perspective of a male pastor being their covering, and it has a very warped sexual undertoning to it. Yes. That they cannot really deal with, which is why they can't deal with a woman being their pastor or their leader spiritually, which is troubling, because I would think that you can identify with my narrative and my experience and respect my grind, because I think no other person can identify with and respect the hustle of always having to overperform, outperform, show up, look presentable, produce, keep the home a home. I don't think anybody else can identify with that but a Black woman. And it's crazy to me that you can identify with all of that and be like, yes, sis, I hear you. But when it's a moment of being your pastor, you got a problem with it because you need a man to be your pastor, because you've allowed the man who pastors your church to become in some ways your spouse, which leads me to a space that I really don't even want to go into. But this is why some of these husbands ain't in church, because you so busy super sexualizing your pastor as your spouse and treating this person with more respect than you do the person in your house. Like, I think that contributes to our lack of men in the church as well, because we have women who will spend more time at the church because pastor said, giving pastor all his authority, even in their household, because they see the pastor as an additional spouse or covering versus a spiritual leader who is to disciple you so that you can make informed spiritual decisions about your household as well. And I'm going off on a whole tangent, but what I'm saying is,
that's okay. what I'm saying, good stuff. This is the kind of stuff that those of us who are in ministry and we are moving in these circles. There really has not been, as I can see, a space for women in ministry to come together. And maybe it has, I just haven't been included in those circles. I don't know. But I'm trying to make circles for the people within my area, because it's important for us to understand that every time we hear somebody say, well, Paul said women ain't supposed to preach, and Paul said, now, are we following Paul or are we following Jesus?
Listen, I don't know who the people that are following. And and even, we talk about the hard subjects here, right? So I am clear that I am a young woman who is privileged in ministry because of the different access points that I've had and platforms that have been granted to me. I consider myself tremendously blessed. Not done, but tremendously blessed, because I just believe God has larger doors and larger platforms as I continue to just march to the drumbeat of God's heart. And what I want to say about that is, I'm clear that there are some things even connected to that allow me some doors. Like, if we're going to talk about women in ministry and how we treat each other, or just women in general, let's be clear. I do think that my presentation contributes to open doors.
Yeah.
I think I think being light skinned contributes to some open doors. Y'all see me with these locks now, but sis will tell you certain places she has seen me showed up hair pushed back in a whole bun and a soft bob and light colored nails and a whole robe because I know what is expected of me in a context.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not saying I'm being hypocritical or different. What I am saying is, for every preacher, we ought to consider context. I think women have to always consider the context even more so because we got to continue to consider how we show up. Our bodies are always contested spaces. Yes. I am 34 in. Hear me, a 34 in, which means that I put good investments in good bras, right? To minimize what I'm carrying. I have to literally consider where your podium falls and how I stand at that podium and where the camera is to make sure that is not a distraction for you while you're listening to me while I'm preaching. So there are places you will see me preach where I will take my shoes off because it changes where the podium falls and where my breast line falls. Mm-hmm. Men don't have to consider that. We as women, I am an animated preacher. I move around. Yes. So when I'm getting dressed, I literally have to consider if a button is right here, how much of my movement can I do? Yes. So I now choose to wear peplums because it covers my behind better. Yeah. Or I remember that if I'm going to wear a short sleeve, it has to at least be at this length. Why? Because I have a tattoo on my sleeve, that on my arm, that everybody cannot handle. I'm being a buck and 100 here. My skirt's gotta hit at least to my knee length or mid calf because I got tattoo paw prints on my thigh. Y'all would be no good if you saw that bottom paw print. Like, did y'all see Dr. Robinson's paw print? Mm-hmm. But a brother, Eddie Long, God rest his soul, wore one of the tightest vests to get up and preach. A brother could unbutton his vest, can take his tie off, can take his shirt off nearly, can grab his crotch and his belt, and y'all not saying nothing. But the minute a sister look like she's gonna at least rub herself one time, y'all are flipping out. So we have these contested, our bodies are contested spaces, and so we take considerations as we go into different contexts and things of that nature. So I'm saying as preachers, consider all of that. I'm saying that women have to consider a whole lot more. What context am I going into? How will my hair look? Do I need to push it back? Y'all see this color right here? Sis could tell you, there have been places she see me hair all black, pushed back. Nope, that's it. That's because I know that's what they need to see to hear the word, because I can't push past my body shape or my age. So what else can I work on? There have been places I preached at where I put a ring on my finger because it mattered to context. What this single woman would look like coming into the church, she must be sleeping with the pastor. There's no way in the world you can have a major opportunity if you weren't sleeping with the male pastor to get this opportunity. We do that to ourselves as women. And so those are some of the roadblocks. Those are some of the things we have to overcome. I just told you how I overcome that. Sometimes it really is my aesthetic, how I show up. I talk quickly. There are some places I go to, and if you look down on my manuscript, it literally says slow down and breathe because my cadence messes people up. So I have to slow down my cadence. But I ain't never heard nobody tell Freddie Haynes or Lance Watson to slow down.
Okay.
I'm just here. I'm just,
y'all, I'm just, but that's real though. That's real. That's real.
You know what I'm saying? But I do know that being this young, attractive, and I'm gonna tell y'all, overeducated Black woman contributes to some of the opportunities that are presented to me. Here's what I want to tell you, sisters who are tuning in, young, old, whatever, however you want to identify yourself. You must be a good steward of your opportunity. And remember that somebody ought to come behind you. Any opportunity presented to me is not just mine.
Yes.
I am very clear that while I am a millennial womanist preacher, there is another preacher who doesn't even have to be younger than me, who ought to be able to have this opportunity, and how I steward this opportunity will determine and can determine an impact if another sister is ever invited again. So I will be mindful of how I dress, how I show up, and pray that as I push an envelope, one day there's no envelope for another sister to even have to encounter. Yeah. And so those are, I think I answered that. Those are like roadblocks. Those are how I overcome. These are ways I think about how I go into a space, because it matters, and not just in the ministry streets, but also in the academic streets. I'm blessed because I do have and have had mentors who are willing to fight for me to have a chance in. But I think it's because they believe and know and trust that I will be a good steward of that chance. Mm-hmm. And I one day plan to be the type of mentor who will fight too, who will stand behind, particularly in the Zion Church. I have no problem. I'm going to speak whatever the truth is, because y'all don't pay my bills. My lights will stay on. Mm-hmm. And when I speak truth, it won't cost me a thing naturally. But when I don't speak truth, if you ain't never have a whooping by God or a spanking by God, or if you ain't never have I can't believe you didn't follow the call, By God, you don't ever want that. I'd rather man dislike me than me come home and not be able to sleep for days because I didn't follow God's voice. So that's one of the reasons I have always decided to be bivocational in our church. So that if there's ever a time I need to speak truth or demonstrate truth that can cost me, I still will have food on my table because I'm going to be an academician.
Yes.
I'm going to go ahead and teach preaching, but at the same time, I'm going to write and publish. I'm going to be a consultant. We are out here consulting how you do campus ministry at HBCUs. So I'm going to make sure I always stay in a place where I have multiple streams of income because I need to always be able to be in a position to speak truth to power in the church, particularly when the power ought not be in power.
Listen, you just gave a whole word right there, because this is a sister who is, I don't know if you can see it behind me, but got my little t-shirt press behind me. I'm working on a line of scripture-based t-shirts. I write books. I'm almost finished with my second Christian fiction romance novel. Now I got 9 books altogether, but this is a series of 5 because Toni Morrison said, if there is a book that you want to read and it does not exist, you must write it. So I wanted to read some romance, but I didn't want it to be all sexy because I was trying to stay celibate, and that don't mean sometimes I give it away and sometimes I celibate. So I had to find a way to read what I wanted to read without all of the overt sexuality. So I wrote it. So now that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to understand that ministry is more than just preaching.
Absolutely.
You know,
I actually contend that the ministry that the greatest sermon is one that people can see in the way you live your life, right? And so I pray that when people quote unquote hear my teaching and or my preaching, it resonates with them because they're like, actually, I've been around her and I know that that's a truth. I know that that's her real passion. I know that when she paused to find the right words to say, it's because she wanted to cuss at y'all. And I want to celebrate her restraint and her diplomacy because she knows that the way she responds to y'all right now can give space for somebody else to do it. So I believe that, like you said, the most impactful sermons are the ones we never preach, are the ones we live and write and the ones we publish and the ones, so yeah, I don't know. I'm in prayer, serving in our denomination almost snatches away hope as a woman in ministry that we've gone this long with only one woman in the Episcopacy. And then even in that capacity, the ways in which our church have continued to try to attack her and assassinate her character. And here we are approaching another general conference where we can almost be pretty clear that they ain't trying to elect another woman. And I am not saying elect a woman just because she's a woman. I want you to elect somebody who's capable.
Because there are capable women. There are plenty of capable women.
Listen, I was just about to say, but if we just look across the landscape of for real, I mean, we could just do pastors, which means doesn't even include me. We just include the pastors in the AIM Zion Church. The women are a whole lot more educated. And be clear, I'm not being funny about education, y'all, but if you're listening to me, would you go to a doctor who never went to medical school?
No.
And never had a clinical internship? Would you trust an attorney who never went to law school? Would you trust an accountant who never ever went to school to learn how to do that work? Yet we trust people with our soul and our spiritual development because we say we see an anointing on their life, and we don't even, if they don't have time to invest at least in a seminary education. And I don't even want to talk about how many are passing without even a bachelor's degree. And I'm talking about the men. So what I'm saying is in our church, and I get a little fired up in case you want to try me, y'all can go ahead and try me. If you look at the statistics of who is serving in pastorates in our church, many of the men who outweigh the women who are serving don't even have bachelor's degrees, but there are plenty of women who are serving in our churches who are in smaller rural churches with no budgets, no resources, with theological education. Yet we say there are no capable ones. No, they're capable and equipped women who could serve in various leadership roles. And then there are women like me who refuse to serve in the system because I just feel like you don't have enough to pay for these degrees that I'm finna hang on my wall. And I'm not gonna cast my pearls before swine. Like there's no way in the world I'm gonna sit here. Now I am going to always be invested in who we are, but I will not be dependent on in who we are. Like I know better than that. If anything, if my grandmothers didn't teach me anything, you got to be self-resourceful. You got to be able to figure it out on your own. Neither one of them even had a college education, let alone finished high school. They taught me that. They taught me to trust in God, but to look at men, and not even just men, but men, humanity sideways and be like, well, I gotta do something for myself. So if we look at the leadership, it does not depict or show the real capabilities of our denomination. We have a sister running for a general officer position who has hosted amazing virtual conferences in the pandemic, who people are attacking because she never pastored. Mm. So now it begs to question, what do you consider to be a qualification to lead in this church? And whatever you consider to be that qualification, are you keeping it consistent across the board? Mm-hmm. And now I'm pushing the envelope all the way. And I hope somebody in purple shirts hear me when I say this. It boggles my mind too, the way we treat women in ministry, because all that really is we got to get past how we treat women in ministry, because we've yet to even approach how we treat queer people, how we treat disabled people, both mentally, emotionally, and physically. We don't even have inclusive language in our discipline to include women, let alone anybody else. And it baffles my mind, because it cannot be because a person is queer, because we've put many of queer persons in pastorate roles, and dare I say elected a few. So where are we with being honest about who we are, what we deem to be leadership, how we sprinkle Jesus on mess, and being honest about who we are and how we will grow. But as we're here on this line, if we can't even be clear in our church, and not just AME Zion, there are plenty of denominations wrestling with this, or how we treat women in ministry, we won't be able to grow anywhere and be a 21st century relevant church. And we're already on the brink of a 22nd century, and we're not even doing right.
See, I'm gonna just let that marinate for just a second, because that right there was very saucy, but it was also very good, okay? Because it was real. And I think that we need more honest dialogue. We're gonna say things at the appropriate time, but not say too much, because you don't want to make nobody upset. And then you might get sent to a little church, that kind of stuff. But I think we really have to be honest. If we are really doing God's work, if this is what this really is for us, then we need to start teaching it better. First of all, we got to teach, people got to understand what it is that they even supposed to be doing. I've heard people quote things that were quoted wrong for years and years and years and years, and it doesn't even make sense. And when you try to direct them to the correct saying and the background and the context of the saying, well, that ain't what I always heard. And I don't know why people always trying to change the Bible and make the Bible different, but it's not different. It's just that we have to be honest about, especially a Black denomination, we have to be honest about the patriarchal and white supremacist colonization of our religion. Ooh. Until we decolonize our spirituality, because God is not some old white man in the sky with a blonde-haired, blue-eyed son named Jesus, who is going to take care of everything. I literally walked my church through a decolonization exercise. I said, close your eyes. Imagine God as spirit. See the energy of the spirit. Is there a color to it? You might see color, you might not. And I kept talking them through it. I said, this is God. God is spirit. We're created in God's image and God's likeness, but that does not mean that God is a man or a woman. God is spirit. Spirit can be anything, And I think that my husband is coming in and saying hello. I think that we have to be willing to see that as individuals with different experiences, different backgrounds, and different fields of ministry, what we read, we may get a different understanding of it based on how we live, what we need, what we've done, what we've seen. Christianity is not a cookie cutter. Following Jesus is not a cookie cutter experience. And I think that there is too much cookie cutteration trying to go. I like to make up words, so just don't mind me. It's a lot of cookie cutteration going on. And I think that we have to be willing to call it out when we see it. And I want to kind of segue into the world of academia because I know that you are definitely there and you are moving in some great circles and you've had some great doors open. And what would you say to somebody like me who is a little bit of background on me? I don't know how much you know about me, but I'm 58 years old. Um, I just got married. I haven't even been married a year yet to my baby daddy from when I was in AIT. And, 36 years we hadn't seen each other. Daughter found him, he found me, rest is history. So now I am interested in furthering my education. Um, tell me what advice you would give me being interested in furthering my education in homiletics specifically, because that's what I'm interested in.
I would say chase it. I would say go after it, especially at your age. And I don't mean necessarily like at such a late age or anything like that. What I mean is having clarity, having lived your life, having had experiences, I think gives you a leg up on that clarity. Because you're talking to somebody who went head on into school and didn't live life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So those are my regrets, that I didn't live life, but there's a strong expectation that I excel academically. I had very few breaks going through school from kindergarten into now this second doctorate program. And so I wrestle personally with, well, all my peers are married and have children now. Am I supposed to be doing that? Can I balance a relationship and this PhD and this tenure-track career? What will be the costs? What happens when the church is exhausted of your intellect and pushes you out? I want to always make sure I still have a space, one foot in the church and one foot in the academy. I don't want one foot in one. I want to be planted in both. And so these are things I wrestle with that I think you've already gone through. And with that clarity, now you can literally really focus and hone in on your lens of homiletics. And so I say that. I also say broadening our understanding of homiletics, right? So we know it's not just preaching, it's communications, it's rhetoric. And so realizing that maybe sometimes continuing education in the area of homiletics might actually mean another field, so that you are building that. So whether it's religious communications, right? So sometimes it's not even at a seminary. Sometimes it is literally at one of the PWIs in the area and they got a religious communications department. Boom, that's homiletics. And so I would say chase it. I would also say as an entry point into the academy, look for adjunct teaching positions or guest lecture and instructing positions. I would also say look at our alma maters. They love to bring us back to be guest lecturers or a guest instructor. And considering the school that you have graduated from, they certainly could use more Black homiletic lenses coming back and teaching our students the field of preaching. But you are also interdisciplinary. So recognizing that what other lens am I most passionate about can be my entry point to homiletics. So for me, it started off as social media linguistics and technology as like my entry point. Now, you know this, I'm researching from a lens of womanist digital discipleship, but I'm looking at what happens when the pastor or the preacher becomes disabled. So I'm looking at full embodiment. What happens when the preacher knows that they are terminally ill? Do they start looking at the text differently and preaching it differently? I think that when we saw Bishop G.E. Patterson preaching, who I think was one of the most amazing preachers that ever walked the face of this earth. And when he knew he was sick and announced to the congregation, I think that we saw a difference in his preaching. Charles Booth, we saw a difference in his preaching. And even if we walk back through Joyce Rogers' preaching, whenever she knew, whatever she had, there was a difference in the fire in her preaching. So what happens as a preacher for your sacred rhetoric when you approach a moment knowing that you are not quote unquote 100%? What happens when we look at a Jeremiah Wright, who was once a particular type of preacher, and we know that his rhetoric and his homiletical lens hasn't changed, but the utterance has. Have we changed in the way we listen to him? So I'm looking at that. And so what I say to that is, what are all those other lenses that you're most passionate about? And how can you use that as an entry point? So whether it is literature and publishing and I feel like your African American literature lens is a lens that brings us to, I feel like you would be a person who would bring the element of homiletics between a Toni Morrison and a Zora Neale Hurston. What would that look like in conjunction to sacred texts of the African American culture, and how we line that up biblically? How do we look at James Baldwin and, Genesis, and the creation narrative? How do we look at proclamation of Thurgood Marshall and our prophets? How do we look at, Barack Obama and his audacity to hope and Ezekiel? So I feel like these are lenses that you are passionate about, that you got semantics, you got language, and I think that it would work. And so I also give you this example. The Reverend Dr. Teresa Fry Brown, who is my mentor, shero, auntie mama, who is now in the Bandy chair of preaching, one of the most envied academic chairs in our field, does not have a degree in homiletics. She has a degree in speech pathology. She has a degree in social transformation. So I'm saying that to say that it is not always the directed path that we think that takes us to the place of teaching what we're most passionate about. She is an ethicist, and by trade as a speech pathologist can help you with your proclamation, and is now in one of the most envied chairs in homiletics. And so I have a bachelor's degree. My bachelor's degree is in government and psychology. I thought I was going to be an attorney. I got an MDiv, and I focused on Black church studies because I was looking at social transformation within the Black church. I got a THM in pastoral care as proclamation because I was then concerned about the mental health of the Black church. I moved and got a D-Min in gospel and culture because I was concerned about the intrusion of social media and technology on the element of proclamation. I am now in a PhD program that is actually named African American Preaching and Sacred Rhetoric. And I am teaching preaching, but next semester I'm teaching preaching and social justice. That's the lens that I'm most passionate about. And so I think that what I say to you is the opportunities are there. They are looking for diversity. And, what ways can you teach what you're most passionate about? I think that's how you will get your entry point into the academy. You already are a published author. That ain't even nothing to argue with. The CV is built.
Yeah, and my thing is poetry, and I always try to incorporate. And when Dr. Freddie Haynes, who I've been listening to for years, said that I should incorporate preaching and poetry, which is something I've always wanted to do anyway, because I always try to not use the same, how you listen to a preacher and you can say along with them what they're going to say because they're using the same old. I try to come up with different things. Me and Dr. Resner have this thing about the salty ham sandwich. I will say what in the salty ham sandwich in a sermon just because I said that one day and Dr. Resner said, I bet you can't put that in a sermon. And I said, I bet I can. And so now my sermons will have at least one salty ham sandwich in it. And it is because people, I see it all the time. They come to church and they want to hear the word, but they fall asleep. Because they do. They fall asleep because there's nothing to shake them up. There's nothing different. And you have a way of doing that. Freddie Haynes certainly does that. Reginald Sharp does that. I've been listening to the three of you specifically for I know a good long time. And it is that, and my mentor, who is Clifford Barnett, he has convinced me that I need to be who I am and understand that through my personality, God has specific people that God will reach through that. So it can be a little, what y'all saw, what I did, for a Christian, that was kind of a watered down version. I go in and I got a big mouth and I might sing, I might do a poem, I might dance, I might do, because I also act and all that kind of stuff. But I think that we have gotten afraid to be creative unless we are hooping.
And I can't hoop.
Keys. I don't hoop. That's not my.
I cannot hoop. I envy it. I want to try it one day.
I tried it one day. It wasn't me.
I want to try. I always have musicians tell me this is your key, and I don't even know what that means. So I want to try it one day. I just I gotta find. I'm gonna sit in somebody's hoopology class and let them teach me.
101.
Yeah, I want to try it, but no. I think that there are people whose deliverance is literally predicated upon your obedience of being authentic, and you have too much to lose in not being authentic. And so, yeah. And and you just I realized I'm just not everybody's cup of tea. And I had to learn to be okay with that. Because one thing about ministry, it'll make you think you need everybody's affirmation. Everybody's supposed to like you. And that's not the case. And it's not even about all of us have different palates in real life. Some people like some hot sauce. If we're gonna talk about hot sauce, some people like Texas Pete versus Red Hot versus Louisiana, right? Versus Tabasco. And so we all have different palates. And I think that we as preachers have to remember that just because someone either doesn't know us or listen to us or recognize us doesn't mean that it takes away from our anointing or our effectiveness. And I think that my godfather and mentor, particularly in the AME Zion Church, taught me that specifically about the AME Zion Church. Bishop Lewis Hunter Sr., who was not everybody's cup of tea, and certainly from my perspective, functioned a bit like a maverick. He was not a hooper, and there are very few sermons that I can tell you that left an impact on me from who he was as a preacher, but who he was as a prayer warrior and who he decided to be as a leader. That is what left the impact on me. And he used to consistently remind me that the people who are in power or think they're in power are really never in power. And that the masses of people who need to be blessed most times are blessed by us and not the ones who are sitting at the table making the decisions in purple shirts. And so it came from one of them, and I will continue to listen to that and recognize that. And when I receive text messages and emails and phone calls from those in power to police the way I live out my life, I remind myself that they have no heaven or hell to put me in. And while that is true, my grandmother would remind me that while nobody has a heaven or hell to put you in, you can let somebody lead you to hell if you let them. And so I have to keep choosing to not engage in things that are not of kingdom business. I could care less what legislation gets passed. I could care less what color stole people are wearing when they show up. I can care less what the perfunctory of passing somebody's character does on a Saturday during the annual conference. Do you know Jesus? and so I think that when we start getting back to the very basics, like you said, like what is ministry? What are we doing? And how do we live that out beyond the pulpit and the four walls of the church is what matters most. I believe that my calling is to teach. I think preaching is a gift of mine that I could walk away from tomorrow as long as I can keep teaching. And there were times where I let the church convince me that I had to put more focus on preaching than teaching. And it just didn't fulfill me. And I think that you, as you continue to navigate, and other women who are tuning in, as you begin to navigate where you're most effective, you have to start deciding what's my gift, what's my calling, or plural thereof, and how will I live that out? I'm really clear that the classroom is my parish. And whenever I get an opportunity to allow a church to become a parish or a congregation to become a parish, I know it's an honor. But I am the biggest introvert you all will ever meet. I'd rather be somewhere in this corner, writing to myself or talking to myself, not to myself, but, writing and doing. And the public beast and politics connected to ministry can be stumbling blocks. And we got to remember that when we take all the glitz and glamour away, what are we really doing?
Yes. Okay, so we're going to stop right here because I think that I couldn't say anything better than what you just said. Now, we're going to stop the recording, but you and I are going to stay on for just a moment. So thank you so much for tuning in to Hoodlums Talking Trash with Diva, delivered, inspired, victorious, anointed, and the one, the only, I got 99 problems, but my faith ain't one, Reverend Dr. Dominique Aisha Robinson. Thank you so much for gracing Hoodlums Talking Trash with your friends.
Thank you.
All right, I'm gonna hit this record button, stop.